All right, this is part 3 of the Math 110 final exam review. I left off part 2 at number 8, so now we are on number 9. To get the graph of f of x equals 3 times the quantity x minus 2 squared minus 5 from its parent function, which is y equals x squared, the squaring function, what transformations and translations occur? All right, so they're not actually asking you to graph it. They just want you to describe how you would get it from just the basic squaring function, which you want to remember is your parabola with vertex at the origin. So what's going on here is there's a 3, let me use my pencil here. There's a 3 coefficient, which gives it a stretch by a factor of 3. And then there's a 2 being subtracted from the x, which gives it a shift horizontally to positive 2, which you can kind of see if you set x minus 2 equal to 0, you can see that x equals 2 gives you that horizontal shift. So 2 units to the right. It's always the opposite. Then you've got this minus 5 outside of the square, which is a vertical shift. And in this case, it's in the direction of the sign, negative being downward. All right. So you would just say for number 9 that there is a stretch by a factor of 3. Okay, that's because that 3 is being multiplied by the function. And there is a shift to the right 2. And also a shift down 5. All right. The other thing that you would want to notice is if that coefficient is positive or negative. When it's positive, that means that it opens upward. If it were negative, it would open downward. Otherwise, it's just your basic parabola. All right, then number 10 says to determine the equation of this following function. So you want to notice that that is half of a sideways parabola. So that's your square root function. And it's being shifted 4 units to the left, but otherwise nothing else. So 4 units to the left would be a plus 4 inside the function with the x. So number 10 is y equals the square root of x plus 4 under the radical. And you could graph that on your calculator to check that. Number 11, determine the equation of the following function. All right, that one's a parabola, so that's your squaring function. Its vertex is here at the point -2, 3. So let me write that down. 11. Vertex is -2, 3. So that gives you your horizontal and vertical shift, otherwise known as H and K. Otherwise, it opens downward, so that's going to give a negative coefficient. There isn't any stretch, though, and you can see that because from the vertex, if you go over 1 unit, it just goes down 1 in either direction. So there's no stretch. If there were a stretch, it would go down whatever that stretch is. So this is the equation y, or f of x, equals negative the quantity x plus 2 squared, the opposite of the horizontal shift, plus 3, because it's shifted up. And again, you could type that into your calculator and graph it and check that. Number 12, we have a graph that you want to remember is the cubic, where it goes up to the right and down to the left. So that has a positive leading coefficient. And the shift for this one is given by this central point right here where it has that leveling off, which looks like it's over 3 and down 1. So it's not called a vertex, but it's similar. +3, -1 gives you your shift. So that's kind of your central point for that graph. So that one is y equals x minus 3 quantity cubed, because that's a cubic, minus 1. Right? The opposite of the horizontal shift, and then the vertical shift is outside the function. Number 13. Number 13 is a v-shaped, and that's your absolute value, v for value if you want to remember it that way. And this one has a vertex, which is at -2, -3. So let's write that down, -2, -3 for number 12. So this one is y equals, and let's see, what's the coefficient here? It's downward, but otherwise, even though it looks like it's kind of wide, that's just because the grid is kind of distorted. The squares here are actually rectangles, but you can see that it goes right through the corners of those rectangles. So the slopes of the sides are +1 and -1, so there's no stretch. So it's just upside down. So we just have a negative in front of our absolute value. And then inside the absolute value, we've got x plus 2, again, the opposite of the horizontal shift, and then -3 for the vertical shift. All right, and one more of these, number 14. We've got the cube root. So the sideways shape like that, kind of a stretched out s, is your cube root function. And this one has its central point at 1, 2, 3. Yep, at y equals 3. So that's the point 0, 3. So this is number 14. Yeah, that one's 13. All right, so 14, you've got 0, 3 as kind of the central point. So this one is y equals cube root, and it is a positive because it goes up to the right and down to the left. And again, there's no stretch because you can kind of see that if you go, I don't know if you can see that, if you go over 1 from the central point, it's only up 1. If you go over to the left 1, it's just down 1. So no stretch. So just a positive cube root. There's no shift horizontally, so there's nothing inside with the x, inside the radical. So just the cube root of x, and then a shift up 3. So +3 is outside.